Well, I mean, I think the greatest upside for our kids is that their very sense of community is going to be fundamentally different than ours. From the dawn of humanity, from like the first moment that we began to crawl, out of the ocean, community meant the people next to you. That's what it meant until about 4 years ago. When all of a sudden it just meant something completely beyond any sort of borders or ethnicities or language even at this point. That those are not the markers of community any longer. Instead, there are these, what sociologists refer to as post-materialist values, these issues that connect a kid in Indonesia to a kid in LA far more so as a community than anyone in their immediate vicinity. So the good thing is that community is going to change fundamentally for what our kids think about as opposed to what we think about. The bad part, going back to how we started this, is that social media can just as easily be a tool of control. It can be just as easily a tool of oppression. In fact, that's exactly what's happening already. I mean, you look at the situation in Iran, where, by the way, all of this started, not in Tunisia. When after the disputed elections in Iran, the way in which social media allowed for Iranians to communicate with each other and with the outside world, and to present a fundamental challenge to the regime. Well, in the last 2 or 3 years, the Iranian regime has really learned a valuable lesson from that. As everywhere else is toppling, what they've done is begun to actually take control of social media instead of cutting it off, instead of trying to turn off social media, instead of saying you can't access Facebook any longer. They are now using Facebook in order to monitor and control any kind of possibility for uprising or protests. So this tool that was used in order to fight the man is very, very quickly being co-opted by the man in order to as just another tool of oppression, another tool of authoritarianism.
I'll give you one example on that front. So in the context of January 25th stuff, myself and another friend decided we wanted to do something. So he was actually a visualization designer, so what he did was he went out to the Twitter sphere and he literally mined all the people who were influential in the context of Egyptian activism, both on the ground in Egypt as well as people around the world, and created together this awesome visualization. All the people, how they were connected, what their level of influence was, what language they were tweeting from, where they were when they were tweeting. And then we had this very big problem, which was, the reason we did it was to say, well, for people who want to get involved, here's a visual representation for you to find the people who can distribute the message that can actually influence the crowd. But the flip side of it was, the reason we got really scared was to say, well, we're also putting bullseyes on every single one of these people. And so we had this, so we actually didn't release it until, so I happened to be at the State Department. Mubarak stepped down, I think on February 9th, or it was a Friday, and I remember and I happened to be there, and it was only after he stepped down that I actually showed people what we had built, because it was just, we just weren't sure. I mean, you could see it could be used as a tool by the man, or it could certainly be used as a tool for good. And I think all the things that we're talking about here have both of that side. You have to be very cognizant of it before you make those decisions, and you have to have rules and sort of, I think, ethical guidelines that you abide by.
I was just going to say, in the very same way that, we saw in the early part of the 20th century these sort of police states forming, the more community becomes a virtual thing, the more that sense of a virtual police state is going to become more and more real. I mean, as I say, the Iranian regime is very clever with this. They have Facebook accounts under pseudonyms. They join these sort of movements for democracy, these green movements online. They infiltrate them, they get information, they get people to sort of out themselves so that then they can punish you in the real world. We shouldn't be surprised that this is happening, but we do have to sort of acknowledge that there is a real negative aspect to it.
I think, just real quick on a side note, just using Twitter also prematurely kills off a lot of our celebrities, which causes a lot of heartache for people. But on a side note, also from our perspective, from a mainstream media perspective, there's a real problem with identifying what legitimate sources are and what legitimate sources are not. And it creates this lazy journalist syndrome where people can go pick up stuff off of Twitter and report it as fact. Where we had an example in our newsroom this week where There was a report from a blog which went viral on Twitter that Larry Ellison was buying his neighbor's $40 million house, which is really only worth $6 million, because he wanted an unobstructed view of the San Francisco Bay for the America's Cup in 2013. The story was completely false and ridiculous, but it didn't come to light until 2 days later, and the correction was not run properly. So.
And the same thing happened with Wildmonium, actually. So when he was captured, there was a moment on Twitter where people said, "Oh, he's been released," and everyone started reporting that he was released. He wasn't released. In fact, his family, I happen to know some of these guys who were running his account at that time, said it was a very big problem for them because now all this great momentum that had gone to sort of get him out was starting to dissipate, and they had to sort of resurrect the whole thing. And also there was sort of misinformation that was being propagated amongst the people, which is very scary.
But to Junaid's point, I'll just add one point, and then we'll come to you for your question. I think there is a bit of a responsibility on entrepreneurs, given just the sheer engagement on social media by young people. I'll give you my example. In Turkey, it has one of the highest engagement on social web, 3 hours a day, by 30 million people between the ages of 13 and 26. And if you ask me what do they do on social media, it's not organizing revolutions, I assure you, Turkey. It's something else. And so I think, and frankly, for me, it was one of the reasons why we launched an education brand. I felt responsible that we got to do something more utilitarian for these folks. So I think it is important that while in many cases it's an effective medium to communicate and to lead change, but also, let's face it, social gaming is the biggest social vertical on Facebook. Gaming. That's it, and it could translate to other things as well. So there is a call to action for those who are looking to leverage Facebook and others, but also do good in the process. There's a question right here. I think you had.